Hey there, happy artists, and welcome back to Kyle Heath Art. Today I wanted to talk about digital versus traditional art. This has been an interesting subject for me recently because at this point I really believe I can consider myself both a digital and a traditional artist. And I've never felt like that was right to call myself that before. I began firmly rooted in traditional art. I started with drawing. I was an avid drawer from around ninth grade or so, obsessive almost. And my love for drawing reignited when I became an adult. I dove back into it, and that was my entryway back into the world of visual creativity was drawing. Drawing very quickly led its way into oil painting, which I consider a deep, deep love of mine now. And that was pretty much my art history up until the very recent past. About a year ago, my wife and I bought an iPad. We both kind of wanted to mess around with it. I'd seen a lot of drawings from people on Instagram using an iPad app called Procreate, and I just thought it was cool. I loved the art that the artists I followed created, and wanted to try that out myself. And my wife is a bit of an artist in her own right. She's really into hand lettering, and she had done that mostly traditionally. But again, the people she followed on Instagram were doing some really cool hand lettering things with Procreate on the iPad. So we both kind of became interested in digital art around the same time and dipped our toes into it about a year ago or so. Now, initially, my steps into digital art were kind of more an add-on to my traditional painting practice. The system that worked for me most with digital was doing studies of the paintings that I would end up doing traditionally, which I still use digital for that purpose. So, for example, if I wanted to do like a grapefruit painting, like you see in front of you right now being done digitally, first I would do a mock-up digitally. Usually be very simplistic. I would focus on the specific value design, the drawing, and probably the rudiments of the color. And then after that, I was done. The digital side of it was complete, and I would move on to a traditional oil painting where I had already solved some of the problems that I knew I was going to face in the painting. So that's all well and good. That's a great use for digital, and I still use it for that purpose. Then over the course of especially the past 2 months, my life has changed quite a bit. My wife and I have welcomed into the world our first child, my beautiful daughter, and gosh, we love it. Being a parent is absolutely amazing. One of the things about having a newborn child, which I'm sure all you parents can relate to, is you have no free time anymore. The free time's gone. Blessedly. I am so happy with the exchange because our daughter's a blast. I love being a parent. But time is much harder to come by. And that's where I discovered a new use for digital art. And that was treating it as a finished medium in its own right. So rather than using digital to do traditional studies, all of a sudden now I was rushing to digital because it was the only thing I had time for. I haven't figured out how to break out the oil paints yet. Now we're getting more into the swing of things, so I feel like that might change this week actually. But in the evenings, I found if I had an hour, it was much easier for me to break out the iPad and do a finished painting on the iPad with all the rendering, all the detail, trying to make a piece as beautifully as I could make it on the digital medium. Maybe that sounds really obvious to you guys. But for me, that was just never what I went to digital for until recently. Now I've discovered that I truly love digital art. I love the way the finished product looks, and often it doesn't look like a real traditional piece the way that I paint. It looks obviously digital, at least to me. But I love the medium. I think that it's very different than traditional. You can make it look extremely different from traditional, and I get a satisfaction from digital art that is different than the traditional art that I do. So all of that is kind of just by means of introduction to my own context with digital art and traditional art. The bulk of this video I want to use to compare and contrast these two mediums and talk in detail about the benefits of each one. I'm sure I'll get into the setbacks with each one too. I'll try to be complete about it. But that's the gist of this video. I kind of intend it to mostly be entertaining. Maybe it'll be informative for those of you who are just traditional artists and maybe haven't considered digital art yet. Maybe I'll sell you on it. And vice versa. Maybe there's some digital artists that are watching this that I can sell on the beauty of traditional art, because I absolutely adore traditional art, and it's always going to be a big part of my art life, I believe. So let's dive into it. The differences between digital and traditional art. I would say each side of this war, of this continuum, has their own views of the opposite side. I think for traditional artists, they may view digital art with a certain amount of skepticism because there's no finished product that you can hang on a wall. And so what's the point? Or that some of the challenge is removed with digital art because you don't have the mental rigor of mixing the colors and matching in the same way. And on the other side, digital artists may look at traditional art and say it's antiquated, it's too slow, it takes forever to get to the place you want to be. Whatever side of the coin you're on, there's sometimes a tendency to look at the other side of art with a bit of skepticism. I'm happy to say that my feet are in both camps now, and I see the beauty of each one. So, now I just want to talk about it. Let's talk about the advantages of each. And I'm going to start with the advantages of traditional art. My first love, the pencil, the paintbrush, the watercolors on paper. There's something truly beautiful about the tactile nature of traditional art. You're truly getting your hands dirty when you're doing traditional art. You're taking real earth objects and making something spectacular out of them. And there's something really poignant about that. We're literally taking dirt and mixing it with oil and slapping it on a flat surface. When you really break it down, that's that's kind of what traditional art is. We view it as this truly high and mighty thing, but really we're in a sense doing the same things that ancient people did on cave walls. They take a piece of stick that was burnt with charcoal and just start scratching on the wall. The same thing that your 4-year-old wants to do. There's something deep within us that wants to represent the deep inmost parts of us by whatever means necessary. And the means we have at our disposal are tactile, earthly things like mud. And how amazing is it as humans that we can take mud and communicate something truly majestic, some deep inward part of what it means to be human to the world. That's really amazing. Speaking is the same thing. The words that we make are just grunts. To an outside observer, it just sounds like people grunting at each other. But we have taken this base thing and used it as a means to express something divine, something very deep in what it means to be a human. And that's a beautiful thing about traditional art. You are still close to the earth as you're transmitting your thoughts out onto a sheet of paper and off to the world. That's a sacred thing. And when we play with mud, we're doing something that humans have done for a very long time. We're taking a place in a continuum that has existed long before us and will continue long after us. That's truly marvelous. Another advantage of traditional art is its slowness, in my opinion. I talked about how the digital side would complain about how slow it is to mix paint, but there are benefits to the slowness of traditional art. You can consider the slowness by design almost. The same way that, writing on a piece of paper with a pen is slower than typing on a keyboard. Something about that enforced slow pace allows your thoughts to marinate and deepen. I would argue sometimes a little bit more than if you're just rushing the thoughts out and then moving on to the next thought. So with oil painting, you're forced to slow down as you work. You're forced to consider, have I mixed this color to exactly match my subject? You're forced to slow down and say, what do I want this brush stroke to look like? Do I want it to be hard or soft? Do I want it to exist out there on the canvas as a visible stroke, or do I want to blend it? There's a certain amount of slow, meditative thought that I would argue can sometimes allow you to create a better piece than if you were just rushing it out quickly. The slowness is a design in traditional art that allows you to think better, to examine more carefully. The fact that you have this tangible medium, like you're sitting down and looking at a canvas, means also that in a lot of ways it's easier for you to step away from it. You can get up out of the chair because you've been there for 3 hours and you need to pee. And the fact that you get up means that now you're standing and looking at the canvas from 10 feet away, and all of a sudden you can see the faults that normally you never would have noticed if you cranked out this piece of art in 1 hour. The slowness is a tool that can help you to create something better and to become better as an artist. Another great thing about this slowness is it can naturally make your art practice more of a meditative experience. In my mind, one of the best things about art is its therapeutic effects. I go to art for that reason. It's my happy place. If I can draw in the evenings, I'm happier. It's just one of my favorite things to do. And traditional art encourages this slowness. It encourages the art to almost be, I'm just going to put the word out there, a little bit boring sometimes, or monotonous. Now, I wouldn't say that I feel bored or monotone when I'm traditionally painting. Quite the opposite. I'm quite thrilled even doing repetitive tasks. But art can become this meditative thing. When you're cranking out a painting, especially when you're in the rendering portion, you're really kind of putting one foot in front of the other, and a part of you can almost mentally relax while you're doing the art. The language that I like to use is flow state. You think of flow state in terms of, meditation, probably, or maybe athletes. And that is this mental state where all of a sudden you feel very calm. Time almost seems to disappear for you. And you develop a mental clarity where all of a sudden your awareness is increased. It becomes easier to think in a lot of ways. And you can just do these repetitive tasks with excellence. All of a sudden, measuring an angle while drawing, and then measuring another angle, and then measuring another angle doesn't feel as monotonous as how I just described it. You're just doing it, man. You're just in the flow state. It's a beautiful and magical thing. And I think it's very healthy for the brain, because most of the time our egos are on full blast and we're just thinking constantly. Our own mind is just chattering away at us all the time. This flow state is a way to calm that side of our brain that is constantly interjecting its own opinions or fears or anxieties. When you draw, that part of you is silenced and you just focus and you do something, and time ceases to exist, and you just partake in this blissful, timeless eternity of satisfying art making. That's the best way I can think of to describe it, at this point at least. I've tried to think about it a little bit. You obviously know by now I'm a bit of a philosopher, I guess, if you've seen any of my other videos. So the slowness of traditional art, I think, is really conducive to the flow state of beautiful art making without judgment. Another advantage of traditional art is that you do have a tangible thing when you're done. If you create a painting, it's something that you can sell and someone could put it on their wall. And that's really enticing to people. As much as I don't believe that art, the value of it is in the tangible medium that the art is made out of. I think what's beautiful about art is the self-expression enclosed within the tangible medium. What's beautiful about the art is the idea that it expresses visually. But you can't argue that people love having things on their walls. They like art because they can bring it into their home and then look at it a lot. And that's something that traditional art excels in. It's something you can create. Someone can hold on to it. They can look at and touch the strokes on the page. They can see the colors in living color right before their eyes, and they can put it in their home and enjoy it. That's, I think, a great advantage of traditional art. Another advantage, which at first is not going to sound like one, is that it's harder to change mistakes. It's harder to change things, period, in a traditional medium. If you've ever had to make like a big change for a commission, you know that sometimes these changes can take a lot of work and it's a huge hassle. But I believe the benefit to the fact that it's hard to change things with traditional art is it can encourage a confidence in your brush handling if you view your art in the right way. It's the same thing as using a pen versus a pencil when you're drawing. With the pencil, you don't have to make any definitive statement. The stroke is impermanent. You can erase it. You can draw over it harder. With a pen, however, it's there, confidently stated or unconfidently stated. It's there and you have to work with it. Now I know if we're talking like oil paint or something that you can scrape it away and start again. But still, once you're a couple hours into an oil painting, it can start getting very difficult to go back and redo an entire thing, repaint an entire thing. It almost feels more natural to just go on with the darn thing, and the next painting you can do something differently. That's often the view that I have with painting, and I think it's a benefit to me because it encourages me not to be overly cautious with my strokes, thinking like, well, is this really what I want? I want this painting to turn out really good. I've chosen to see it as an advantage that it's harder to change things because I'm forced into confidence. I just have to get on with it and state the thing that I want to state with the paint. And if it's ugly, if it's wrong, then tomorrow's another painting. But I just have to plunge forward with it. And what that does is it creates these eureka moments where you do something boldly, differently than you've ever done, and sometimes that thing that you do ends up being marvelous. And it ends up being the way that you want to paint henceforth. The strange color that you just went with, or that weird angle, that sense of light that you captured. Bold art making opens up ample opportunities for these eureka moments. And that'll never happen when you're painting overly cautious, when you're painting the exact same way that you always paint every time you sit down. The fact that it's harder to change things in a traditional medium, I think, is a tool that you can use to encourage confident art making. Now, let's get to the other side of the battle. Traditional versus digital. Now let's talk up the strengths of the digital medium. Give them some love. The first advantage of the digital medium, which I am so thankful for as a new father, is that digital art is simply faster than traditional art. You have to do it to really understand just how much faster it is. The first time I really noticed how much faster digital art could be was by looking at some of the artists on Instagram. Some of these digital artists would do what they called morning warm-ups. And basically what that meant for at least one person I'm thinking of is spend an hour in the morning just knocking out a landscape painting. Just getting your arm ready for the work ahead of the day. Looking at this 1 hour landscape painting, it was far more rendered complete, far more perfect than anyone could do in an entire day of traditional painting. Arguably 2 days of traditional painting could not do what this one digital painter knocked out in an hour. And like I said earlier, faster is not always better, but man, it is undeniable that digital art is just so much faster. And if you've never done digital art before, I can explain some of the reasons why it's faster, but you really have to do it to understand just how much ridiculously faster it is than traditional art. You don't have to deal with paint mixing anymore, which for my painters out there, you know just how time consuming it can be to mix paint. You really know it if you pre-mix your paint, because then you can see, oh, I literally spent 45 minutes mixing paint. If you kind of mix as you go along, you may not notice just how significant the paint mixing time is. Laying down your brush strokes somehow takes longer. Well, I know what the somehow is. You have to clean your brush, you know? You don't want to paint with a dirty brush, or your colors are going to get muddy and gross. So, you're constantly dealing with the water cup or with the mineral spirits. And that takes time. So digital painting is just insanely faster by an order of magnitude. It's also much, much easier to make corrections and changes. That's another reason it's faster, is digital painting just has shortcuts that make it easier to do broad, sweeping changes. You can quickly select certain areas and then paint over just that spot. You can play around with all of the hues and values at once. You can paint an entirely different background without affecting the foreground at all. There's all these shortcuts that, not even I know all of them, but there's just so many conveniences to digital art that make it massively simpler to make changes and corrections. One of my recent favorites is the Liquify tool in Procreate, which I guess the best way to describe it is, say you draw a face and then you notice that like one of the eyes is higher than the other. In traditional art, you gotta erase the eye and redraw the dang thing. But with the Liquify tool on Procreate, you just kind of drag the eye down and suddenly it's good. It feels like cheating. It's just wonderful. And of course, there's no cheating in art. You can do anything. It's all valid. It's the same as the argument of, people who draw on projectors and then paint over that versus people who draw freehand. In my opinion, it's all good. Whatever way you can use to create something beautiful is valid. There's no rules. But that's beside the point. Look at these trails that I find myself on. So we're talking about how digital painting is faster. There's one other thing I wanted to mention about that. But you know what? I'm going to make it a separate point because this feels kind of like a different thing. So we'll say my second advantage of digital art is that it's far more conducive to the fast study of the fundamentals of art. So digital art is more conducive to quick study, quick iteration over and over again of a theme that you want to get better at. The way that you get better at art is through iterating again and again, over and over, on the basic fundamentals of art. That's why you may have heard this phrase, getting good at painting is all about getting your mileage in. That's kind of like a runner's way of saying it, but maybe you've heard that in the context of painting. The way that you become a better painter is by painting a bunch. Do a bunch of painting, and you're going to become a good artist. I believe that is absolutely true. And so when we think about that, getting better at art is doing a fundamental over and over again. So you get better at drawing by judging angles over and over and over again, and getting more of a sensitivity to, well, yeah, this is actually kind of an acute angle, it's skinnier than this. And the more and more you do that thing, the better you are at judging that thing. Same thing with, for example, colors. I get better and better at mixing a real earthy looking brown from just the primary colors by doing it a bunch. And at first when I do it, it's going to be really hard to get the right brown. But the more and more I iterate on mixing, the easier mixing becomes, and the more accurate my color becomes. I'm iterating over and over again on a specific fundamental of art and getting better at it. That's the thing about digital art that traditional art doesn't quite have. Is, number one, it's much faster, so you can knock out more paintings. You think about traditional art, artists can easily spend a month on one painting, which is fine. That's not a criticism. But when you think about that in terms of improvement, in 1 month, that artist has had the opportunity to work on their drawing skills once. That artist has had the opportunity to, let's say, improve his sense of lights and darks once. And, I know it's not exactly like, it's not that simple. The artist has had a ton of opportunities to work on their rendering skills. But in a lot of ways, beyond the rendering skills, the other skills of art are not being worked on for a project that takes an entire month. So the fact that a digital painting, you can knock one out every single hour, means in 1 hour, you're practicing all the fundamentals of art. You're getting better at drawing, you're getting better at color, you're getting better at values, you're getting better at edges, at rendering, at composition. You've exercised all those skills in a 1 hour period. And because you're exercising those skills more and more, you're going to get better. And so you find this plays out when you look at the skills of digital artists versus traditional artists. Digital artists tend to get better much more quickly than traditional artists. And I don't mean that as a judgment call, because I don't believe that getting better at art is the point of art for everybody. It's certainly not the one valid reason to partake in art. But in my mind, it's patently obvious that digital artists improve more quickly than traditional ones. And in my mind, that's because of this frequent iteration. They're getting to work out those art muscles more and more often. They're getting their miles in more quickly than a traditional artist would. So yeah, let's keep going. What's another advantage of digital art? Here's kind of a different one. I think digital art has an advantage of having more color than traditional art. And you may not understand exactly what I mean by that, but let's think of it this way. let's look at traditional art. When you're mixing colors with traditional art, think in terms of brightness and darkness. The brightest white that you can produce is that tube white that you've got. And the darkest dark that you can produce is the, tube of ivory black, or the black that you mixed up out of the primary colors. Those are the limitations of light and dark that you can deal with. Van Gogh used to be tortured by the idea that he couldn't mix a color that was as bright as the sun that he looked at up in the sky. And that's because traditional art is subtractive color mixing. What that means is when two colors come together, the result is going to be darker and less saturated than the two that came before it. And that's how color mixing works with paints. It's subtractive color mixing. So we can't get a white that's brighter than tube white. We can't get a black that's darker than tube black. In addition, we're limited in the saturation of the colors that we use based on the materials that we have. So, we've found a way to get a very vibrant red by taking some cadmium and some oil and mixing it together. I don't know if there's anything else in cadmium paint other than that. But that's a way that we've discovered to get a really bright red. But there are more saturated reds than cadmium out there. We cannot access the brightest reds that we know exist with just traditional paints. Same thing goes with mixing these colors together. If I were to mix a red and a blue together, oftentimes the result is not a truly vivid, powerful purple. A lot of times what comes out instead is a toned down purple. It's one of the reasons why a lot of artists, oil painters might have a tube of purple that they may use very sparingly, but they keep it around because once you need to do like a really vibrant light purple flower or something, it's hard to mix that purple from red and blue. So the tube helps you to get as vibrant as you want it to be. Those are limitations of traditional art that do not exist in digital art. In digital, you have access to all the colors. You can mix a white that's brighter than tube white. You can get some super crazy saturated lime greens. It's all at your disposal. It's up to you. And I would consider that a strength in the sense that it expands your tool set. It gives you the opportunity to, you got more tools in your belt. Now, I'm going to jump to the traditional side too, because I think traditional has something to say about this too. The limitations of your colors, I do think, can also be a strength. So I don't mean to just knock on traditional art with this. There are great benefits to limiting your palette. You've probably heard the term before, a limited palette. And it's great. I solely use a limited palette when I oil paint. In fact, I paint exclusively, almost exclusively, from a tube of red, blue, and yellow, and white. And I mix every single color that I use out of those three. I do that, number one, because it exercises my ability to see and mix color, but also because there's this certain uniformity that happens when you only use a limited palette. Colors just go together a little bit better because there's a little bit of each color in everything that you use. You can just tell. The uniformity is great and it's easy. It just works. The scene looks like all these colors belong. Like you don't have this weird outlier that's standing out that just, oh, it doesn't look like that red should exist in that light or something like that. With the limited palette, you avoid that. So that's I'm gonna end it there. That's everything I wanted to say about the advantages of traditional art versus the advantages of digital art. And so my argument at the end of this for you is dive enthusiastically into both. Dive enthusiastically into any medium that catches your interest, that you think might help you to express yourself uniquely as an artist, or that you think might increase your skills as an artist, if that's something that you value. Every single medium in art is valuable in its own right. There's no rules to art. There's no cheating. There's no unfair. Whatever you can do to create something that expresses you, that's valid. And you might discover new things about yourself by dipping your toes into digital art or traditional art if you haven't done either one. So that's it. Check them both out. I now consider myself both a digital artist and a traditional artist without reservation. I appreciate you all today. It's so great to talk to you again, and I hope you have a great day. Happy painting, everyone.